Well, I guess this is going to be interesting. I'm going to make a video explaining what G-D means, the curse word here in the United States. It's part of American culture that I guess it's like the second worst curse word. Like there's the F word and then there's GD and then everything else kind of falls. But I understand in England, like the C word is like at the top and then everything. I guess it's different wherever you go. But here in the United States, the understanding is, for whatever arbitrary reason, that's how it's set up. So yes, I will make a video explaining what GD actually means. And I think you're going to be challenged, and I think you're going to learn from this because it doesn't mean what you think it means. So take it from me. Now, even though on most videos I make a point to say I'm not an expert, I will say, in this one I'm a little bit of an expert because I spent 4 years of my life getting an English degree. Not a whole lot of people on YouTube can say they have an English degree, and that implies they know a lot about the English language and how it works all behind the scenes. I'm going to explain to you what GD actually means, okay? So think of it this way. So God can bless people, right? God can curse people. So let's use the D. Let's just swap that for the word curse. And ultimately, specifically, we're saying curse to hell for eternal damnation, right? Suffer forever in the lake of fire, whatever exactly hell is, if it's flames that are actually burning you forever, and there's also darkness and there's loneliness. How does fire coexist with darkness? I don't know. I only have a human understanding of, in the New Testament, of when hell is described. Whatever exactly that is, only God has the authority to curse something eternally. And to curse eternally ultimately is what the D is standing for in this. Okay? So when people say GD it, they're saying God eternally cursed this thing or this person forever for eternal punishment in hell. Eternal destruction. That's what they're saying. So, just to put it in perspective, a guy is walking in the store, and as he's like swinging his arms and he like hits a rail like in a store, like ow, and it like bends his thumb back. I know this is random, but this is why people. So then he says GD it because it bent his thumb back, or whatever silly thing that happened, whatever reason people say the phrase. So he's saying that thing where I bent my thumb back because it got stuck in that rail or that store display. What was that? He just got caught in. Whatever it was, it hurt him, and he got angry. So he's saying, God, curse that situation. That's what it is. But if you say it to a person, which people typically don't, they typically say the F word if they're going to curse somebody. But if they were to say that, they'd be saying, I hope God sends you to hell forever. It's like saying go to hell is ultimately what it is saying when that's it. But here's why this is a fascinating topic. Because people reverse it in their brain. Instead of saying God curse that or that person, in their mind they're saying, they're basically as if they're cursing God. And that's not the language, the syntax of that phrase. They're saying God cursed that thing. And what's silly about it is, it's never about anything spiritual anyway. And ultimately, why would you tell God what to curse? God is God. He's not gonna, is he really gonna listen to you? I mean, I guess we could look at the Old Testament where I don't know. He's not going to curse the guy who cut you off on the interstate. He's not gonna do that. That's not how it works. That's not even, and it's funny because this is all in the context of the Christian faith. So obviously as Christians, we are not to curse our enemies or our perceived enemies. We are to love them. We are to love our neighbors as ourselves. So the whole concept of cursing, that's where it becomes a bad thing, because it's basically heresy to say God cursed that person or that thing when ultimately you should be loving your enemies. That's the real heresy involved. But when you hear GD, you're not hearing someone curse God. You're asking God to curse someone or something, which in itself is ultimately absolutely against what the Christian faith is all about. Now, with that being said, we have to consider this too. Take the G out of it and just make it the D, all right? So if somebody says D it, if they say that, or they just say D, they just say the word, they're just saying curse that thing to hell forever. Now they left God out of it, but they're still, how else can something be eternally cursed if God's not involved? So it's still leaning on a Christian faith, but wanting the opposite of what God would want anyway. Now, last thought on this. I think a major misunderstanding a lot of people have is when you look at the Old Testament, so this goes for Jewish viewers as well. You look at the Ten Commandments, it says not to use God's name in vain. And people make the mistake, and it's just taught in Christian culture, that, oh, it's one of the Ten Commandments not to say GD. And granted, have I ever said it? No. The closest I've ever come to say it was in this video explaining it. But that's not what taking God's name in vain. So here's where it gets really interesting. And this is common in sitcoms and movies all the time. And you ever watch Friends? Every episode they say it all throughout the show. And Janice, oh my, right? And then she says God's name. That is actually using God's name in vain. Saying God in a way that's not holy, just saying it randomly when God's name is holy. So, and even maybe possibly I come at risk of actually breaking one of those Ten Commandments by doing this, but ultimately I'm doing this in a way that's explaining that. So, but ultimately people casually use God's name, and what I believe is that's actually using God's name in vain, not saying GD. With that being said, I'm not endorsing anyone say GD, because again, it's only a reflection of the fact that, well, why are you acknowledging that God has the ability to curse things to hell forever, and yet you're asking him to do that in a way that is the opposite of what God is all about anyway. We are to love our enemies. So there's the paradox. So if you're asking me, GD is not what's being talked about as far as using God's name in vain. It's actually easier to do than we think. Anytime we say God's name or say, oh my, anytime we do that, we're making casual use of God's holy name instead of talking about God in a way that is helping point others to him. And ultimately, if someone just says the D word, it's ultimately the same as GD, because you can't have the D without the G. Only God can curse things forever anyway. So it's a shortcut, and it seems like a lesser curse word, but really it's not. And actually, if you can actually Google this, you can look up in a dictionary, you'll see that if you type in GD, you're going to see that ultimately it's just, or the D word, you're going to see it's shorthand for GD. That's simply how it works. In the same way that gosh is a euphemism for God's name, and so on. And Jiminy Cricket and all these other things, it's just shorthand for something else. So you got comments? I'd love to hear them. Again, usually I don't claim to be an expert, but I do have an English degree. That's got to mean something. That's got to mean that I've taught you something you wouldn't have thought about otherwise. And if I was ever an expert, it'd probably be in this video. But people love to prove me wrong. So if that's you and you want to say, no, you're wrong, here's the reality, you can do that. And if you want to say, Nick, I never knew that. That makes a lot of sense now that you explained it. You can do that too. And if you want to say, Nick, I just spent 9 minutes of my life I'll never get back, and that was a random video, but I can't say I didn't like it, you can say that too in the comments right here.